So today I want to discuss something that I think is very important. And once you understand this, everything that is happening right now, the war in Iran, the dollar weakening, the political chaos in America, all of it will make complete sense to you. Because it is not random, it is a pattern that has repeated itself across 3,000 years of human history. And right now, America is following that pattern almost perfectly. Okay, so let me introduce you to a historian named Sir John Glubb. Now, most people have never heard of Sir John Glubb. He is not very famous, but I think he is one of the most important historians of the 20th century. He was a British general and scholar who spent his entire career studying empires. Not one empire, not two, all of the great empires in history. The Assyrians, the Persians, the Greeks, the Romans, the Arabs, the Mongols, the Ottomans, the Spanish, the British. And after studying all of these empires, he published a short book called The Fate of Empires. And in that book, he made one of the most remarkable observations in all of historical scholarship. He said, all empires, without exception, go through the same stages. The same sequence, every single time. And the average lifespan of a great empire is 250 years. Now, I want you to hold that number in your head. 250 years. America is 249 years old. Okay? So let's go through the stages. Because once you understand the stages, you will understand exactly where America is right now and why what is happening was always going to happen. Stage 1 is what Glubb calls the age of conquest. Every empire begins the same way. It is lean, it is hungry, it is disciplined, it has raw energy, and it expands through military and economic superiority. At this stage, there is no corruption because there is no wealth yet to be corrupt. There is no complacency because there is no comfort yet to be complacent about. The soldiers are motivated. The leadership is focused. The purpose is clear. For America, this is the period from roughly 1776 through World War II. America fights a revolution against the greatest empire in the world and wins. It expands across a continent. It develops the largest industrial economy ever seen. And then in World War II, it does something unprecedented in all of history. It fights on two fronts simultaneously, across both the Atlantic and the Pacific, against two major powers, and defeats both of them. Think about what that required. Think about what that took. 18-year-old boys landing on Normandy Beach knowing most of them would be killed. Soldiers fighting in jungles in the Pacific with diseases they had never encountered. Factories running 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Women leaving their homes to build ships and aircraft. That is what stage 1 looks like. Sacrifice, focus, hunger, discipline. And when it was over, America did not just win the war. It rebuilt its enemies. The Marshall Plan, Bretton Woods. The dollar becomes the world's reserve currency. 800 military bases built around the world. America, at the peak of stage 1, was genuinely the most powerful civilization in the history of humanity. Stage 2 is what Glubb calls the age of commerce. Once military dominance is established, it converts into economic dominance. The empire controls trade routes. Wealth flows toward the center. The standard of living rises. The middle class expands. And for a brief period, a golden period, the empire is simultaneously the most powerful and the most prosperous society in the world. For America, this is the 1950s and 1960s. The American middle class during this period was the strongest middle class in the history of human civilization. Workers in factories could afford houses, cars, vacations, college for their children on a single salary. The dollar was backed by gold. American manufacturing produced more than any country in history. American universities were the best in the world. American science put men on the moon. This is stage 2, and it feels like it will last forever. But it never does. Stage 3 is what Glubb calls the age of affluence. And this is where it begins to go wrong. Because wealth creates comfort, and comfort creates complacency, and complacency creates a very specific kind of thinking. The thinking that says, we have always been dominant, therefore we will always be dominant. We do not need to sacrifice anymore. We do not need to be disciplined anymore. We already won. And here is where the military-industrial complex enters the picture. I've talked about this before. After World War II, America kept its war machine running. Eisenhower, a general himself, warned about this when he left office in 1961. He said, and I want you to remember these words, he said, Beware the military-industrial complex. He was warning that a permanent military establishment combined with a large arms industry would acquire undue influence in the American government, and that influence would distort priorities. Instead of the military serving America's strategic interests would begin to serve the military. That is exactly what happened. Vietnam was the first clear sign. America spent over $800 billion in today's dollars fighting Vietnam. It lost 58,000 soldiers, and it accomplished nothing. It left, and Vietnam became communist anyway, and there was no accountability. No one asked, why did we spend this money and achieve nothing? Because in stage 3, the purpose of military spending is no longer to win wars. The purpose of military spending is to keep the system going, to keep the contractors profitable, to keep the generals employed, to keep the politicians funded by the defense industry. Winning or losing the war is almost secondary. And during this period, America began to export its manufacturing to China and Southeast Asia because the financial sector, Wall Street, discovered it was more profitable to make money from financial instruments than from making physical things. So the factories closed. The middle class began to shrink. Wages stopped rising. The year was 1973. American wages peaked in real terms in 1973, and they have barely moved since. Think about that. 50 years. And the average American worker has not gotten a real raise in 50 years. That is stage 3. Wealth at the top, stagnation at the bottom. And an establishment that is too comfortable to admit there is a problem. Now we come to stage 4, and this is the critical stage. This is the stage Glubb calls the age of decadence. And I want to be very clear about what decadence means here. It does not mean moral failure. It does not mean the people are bad. What it means is that the system itself has become self-destructive. It is eating itself, and 4 things happen simultaneously. And they reinforce each other, which is why no empire has ever escaped this stage. Let me take each one slowly. The first is that military spending becomes completely divorced from military results. America spends approximately $900 billion per year on its military. Let me put that in perspective. That is more than the next 10 countries combined. China, which is America's main strategic competitor, spends about $250 billion. Russia, which America calls its main military enemy, spends about $80 billion. America spends 11 times more than Russia on its military. And yet, America could not defeat the Taliban in Afghanistan, a group of fighters in sandals with Kalashnikovs. America could not establish stability in Iraq after 20 years. And right now in Iran, America is spending $3 million interceptor missiles to try to stop $50,000 Iranian drones and failing. Now here is the game theory point that I want you to really understand. When the cost of an action consistently exceeds the benefit, a rational actor stops doing it. That is basic game theory. If every time you play a game, you spend more money than you win, a rational player stops playing. But an empire in stage 4 cannot stop, because the military-industrial complex has captured the political system. Defense contractors give money to politicians. Politicians give contracts to defense contractors. Generals retire and join defense contractor boards. The entire system is a closed loop that benefits from continued military spending regardless of results. The F-35 fighter jet, $100 million each, 26 years to develop, exists not because it is the best strategic choice for America, but because it employs people in 45 of the 50 American states. Every senator who might vote against it has constituents who work on it. This is not stupidity. This is a system doing exactly what it is designed to do. But what it is designed to do is destroy the empire. The second thing that happens in stage 4 is that debt becomes existential. America currently has approximately $36 trillion in national debt. And every year, America is adding roughly $2 trillion more. Now, this in itself is serious. But here is the thing that most people do not understand. America is now spending approximately $1 trillion per year just on interest payments on that debt. $1 trillion per year just to pay the interest, not to reduce the debt, not to pay it off, just to service the interest. To put that in perspective, $1 trillion in interest payments is more than the entire annual defense budget of any other country in the world. America is spending more money paying interest on old debt than China spends on its entire military. Now, here's the game theory of this. And this is what I call a debt trap. Once your debt reaches a certain size, you must borrow new money to pay the interest on old money. And the interest on the new money adds to the total debt, which requires more borrowing, which adds more interest, which requires more borrowing. This is a mathematical spiral. The only exits from a debt spiral are default, which destroys your currency, or inflation, which also destroys your currency. In either case, the currency collapses. And here is the connection to the current war. Every bomb dropped on Iran costs money. Every interceptor missile costs $3 million to $10 million. Every deployment of troops costs money. America is adding the cost of this war on top of a debt that is already in a spiral. This is not a small problem. This is an existential problem. The third thing that happens in stage 4 is that the empire weaponizes its currency until it cannot. Now, I need to explain this carefully because it is very important and most people do not understand it. After World War II, America created something called the Bretton Woods system and later the petrodollar system. The basic deal was this: all global trade, especially oil, would be conducted in US dollars. This meant every country in the world needed to hold US dollars in reserve, which meant permanent global demand for the dollar, which meant America could print money and run deficits in a way no other country could, because everyone needed your currency. This was the greatest economic privilege in the history of the world, and for decades, America used it carefully. But in stage 4, the age of decadence, the empire starts to weaponize its tools. America began using the dollar as a weapon. Sanctions against Russia, sanctions against Iran, sanctions against Venezuela, sanctions against Cuba. Freezing Russian central bank assets, 300 billion of them belonging to Russia's government, overnight. Now think about this from a game theory perspective. If I am a country holding US dollar reserves and I watch America freeze $300 billion of Russian reserves overnight, well, what do I now know? I know that my dollar reserves are not safe, that they can be taken away from me if America decides it doesn't like my government. So what do? I start moving my reserves out of dollars. I start building alternatives. This is exactly what happened. BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, and now many more, represents today approximately 40% of global GDP. These countries are actively building payment systems that do not require the dollar. They are settling trade in local currencies. They are buying gold instead of dollars. Saudi Arabia, the foundation of the petrodollar system, is now selling oil to China in yuan. America thought it was punishing its enemies by weaponizing the dollar. What it actually did was give every country in the world the maximum possible incentive to build an alternative. It accelerated de-dollarization by using the dollar as a weapon. This is stage 4 thinking. Short-term power move that produces long-term self-destruction. And the fourth thing that happens in stage 4 is that the social fabric breaks from within. And this is perhaps the most painful one to discuss because it involves real people, real suffering. America has the highest rate of homelessness of any developed country in the world. American infrastructure, bridges, roads, water systems is crumbling. American life expectancy has been declining. Drug addiction has become a national crisis. And wages, as I said, have been stagnant since 1973 in real terms. At the same time, wealth at the very top has exploded. The richest 1% of Americans now own more wealth than the bottom 90% combined. This is not a natural outcome. This is the result of deliberate policy choices made over 50 years that systematically transferred wealth from the middle class to the financial elite. And what does this produce politically? A population